this year's home base for the 1971 One-Ton Cup. 17 boats competing for 8 nations, all getting their boats ready to win this coveted trophy. Sid Fisher in Stormy Petrel from Australia, a fiberglass Swan 37. Jean Berger in Joran from Switzerland, a steel Dick Carter design. My boat, Waianawa, winner of the New Zealand trials, a good downwind performer, and so far a good performer in the heavy weather to windward. Hans Balken, Optimus B for Germany. Hans is a good friend of mine and an arch rival, having won 2 one-ton cups to my 1. Alan Warwick in Young Nick, a very good performer for New Zealand. Unlucky not to win the trials, she must be regarded as one of the top contenders. Here's Sid Fisher, Stormy Petrel.
Well, it's the first time I've sailed in the One-Ton Cup series. She's a fiberglass yacht. A few of the features that are incorporated in her are different to some of the other boats. She has the hankless forestay, known as a sea stay, for the headsails, and we have the, she's probably over-winched by comparison with some of the other boats. She's slightly heavier displacement than some of the other yachts too, carrying a little bit more sail area.
How do you think you'll go, Sid?
Reasonably well. Can't predict the fortunes of sailing.
Hans Balken, Optimus B.
Oh, I feel exactly the same way I felt when we were at Le Havre in 1967 for the first One-Ton Cup event. We ended having a brand new boat, completely untuned, and not knowing if she was fast or slow. So I wonder what weather we will have, and I wonder how the boat will perform, because we had sailed in light weather only in Germany, and she's tuned to light weather, and it isn't quite light weather what we have here.
These were my thoughts. Olympic races, the Swan 37s are probably going to be the toughest competition, mainly Young Nick, Escapade and Stormy Petrel. Alan Warwick, ex-Rainbow 2 man, now skipper of Young Nick. How do you think you'll go, Alan?
Well, much the same as any race, I guess. It's the first of a series of races, and I think when we go into a series of races, the first one's always critical. You're always trying to sound out the opposition, you're feeling your own ground, and you're trying to assess the whole of the company that you're racing with.
Gil Hedges, Escapade.
We have our fingers crossed. We're obviously very worried about some of the opposition, but we'll be trying as hard as we can. Yeah.
Well, here we are in Auckland, in the Hauraki Gulf, the venue of the 1971 One-Ton Cup. This series of 5 races is raced for in the Hauraki Gulf, and the first race, a 30-miler, is raced for between Wangaparaoa Peninsula and Rangitoto Island, just north of the city. The race incorporates a 5-mile beat to windward, 2 spinnaker reaches, another 5-mile beat to windward, a run, and a 5-mile beat to the finish. The first race started in a 20-knot southeasterly with a nasty northerly chop. On the first beat, the wind swung towards the south and started to die. A few boats, including Joran, went to the south. But the majority of the fleet headed out to the east. By the time the first mark was reached, it became obvious that Stormy Petrel had already taken a commanding lead in this race. Here's Sid Fisher and his boys rounding the first mark on Stormy, spinnaker up quickly and away. Following behind was Alan Warwick and Young Nick, with 2 Rainbow 2 crewmen on the foredeck, John Woolley and Dave Craig. Following Young Nick was Apicist from Germany, and behind Apicist was Optimist, Waianawa and Escapade, all closely bunched. On the second leg we managed to pass Optimist and be 4th boat around the second mark. The wind was now very light, the seas sloppy, and as you can see the spinnakers are all flopping around. Positions remained unchanged during this next leg, and also up the following beat. And at the fourth mark, Stormy had worked her way into a commanding lead. Here's Stormy coming up to the fourth mark, and look how light the wind is now. Very little breeze, the sea has smoothed down, and it's obvious already that Stormy's additional weight over the other Swan 37s is paying off. Stormy closely followed by Young Nick. Young Nick is the same design as Stormy Petrel. The only difference is Young Nick is wooden construction, but Stormy Petrel is fiberglass and foam. Stormy Petrel is also about 2,000 pounds heavier than Young Nick. As Young Nick rounds the mark, her spinnaker's up and her genoa comes down. During this leg, which was a run down to the fifth mark, the wind swung through the east into a very light northeasterly. At this stage, the race had become a little bit of a procession, and the only notable thing was that Apicist had closed the gap between herself and Young Nick. And here's Apicist coming round, setting her now familiar spinnaker, yellow and black bumblebee stripe. Here's Stormy coming up to the finish, well clear of the rest of the fleet. But positions had changed drastically further back. In the light northeasterly breeze, Apicist worked her way through Young Nick's lee to lead Young Nick across the finishing line to be second boat to finish. There's Apicist crossing now, closely followed by Young Nick. Positions were changing even more drastically further back. Optimus B had gone to windward with Waianawa, and Joran, sailing very quickly, sailed through the lee of these two boats and Escapade to be the fourth boat across the line. Escapade finished fifth, and she was closely followed by Optimus B and Waianawa, who by this stage had gone out to windward and was coming into the finish with a spinnaker on. Han Balkan, what were your thoughts on the first race?
This 40 or 50 degree wind shift when we approached the finish, of course, was especially adverse for those boats which were most to windward, and this was Waianawa. So it was obvious that she had to try something. She was the boat most to windward, and she tried a very shy kite, very flat spinnaker. But in my judgment, the distance to the finish was too short that she could catch us. And well, there's always the possibility that you foul up a maneuver. So we left the kite in the bag and made it for the windward mark on the finish line and stayed ahead of Waianawa. Well, the start was a bit funny because the inner distance buoy, which should be positioned about 80 yards from the committee boat, wasn't there. Was being towed away by a small motorboat, so we started without that. It didn't cause us too much trouble because we wanted to start on the other side of the line. Unfortunately, we were about 2 seconds earlier, so we had to tack, and it ruined the start.
The second race was a 150-mile race, starting in the inner Gulf with a 5-mile beat to windward, a square run out to Channel Island, a hard beat into Waiheke Island around the Inverell, out to Canoe Rock, down to a mark in the inner Gulf, back around Channel Island and into the finish off Rangitoto Island. Just for a change, we were the first boat to be around the first mark, and we led around Channel Island, closely followed by Mustang and Escapade, into a hard beat into Waiheke. On the wind, Waianawa revels in these conditions. You can see her really ploughing through the seas. Her light mast, much lighter than in any of the other big one-tonners, was bending quite a lot, but she was really going. At this stage, on the third leg, we were leading the rest of the fleet by over 2 minutes. The next boat behind us was Kishmal, representing Sweden, and she was closely followed by Escapade. Here you can see Escapade behind and to leeward of Waianawa. At this stage, we were laying in towards Waiheke Island to round the next mark, which was the Inverell, to the southeast of Waiheke Island. Waianawa tacks to lay in to the next mark. Gill Hedges at this stage had been also going very well, as had Stormy Petrel and Kishmal.
Main away, let it go.
After rounding the Inverell, we had a tight spinnaker reach to Canoe Rock. We started off by wearing our big spinnakers, and then later on we took them off and reached under cutter gear. Escapade coming along behind, really moving well. Look at these Sparkman Stevens boats, the way they get a bone in their teeth and push through the water. Gill Hedges, Escapade skipper, a very quiet man who knows how to drive a boat hard. Those three sails perfectly set and the boat is really creaming along. At this stage, Escapade is doing probably 8 to 9 knots down the seas. Here we are on our way home in the early morning. We were out on our own, reaching under our now familiar cutter gear with the Yankee and staysail set underneath it.
Yankie's looking good, Troy. A little ease on the staysail. A bit more ease on the staysail.
Further back, Optimist and young Nick were in close company. During the night, we reached out around Canoe Rock and into the mark in the inner Gulf. Positions changed rapidly, but we increased our lead, and when we rounded Channel Island, we reckoned we had the race in the bag because we were leading by over 12 minutes. But things started to happen on the way into the finish. In by Rangitoto now, the wind very, very light. Stormy very close behind us as we were sitting almost motionless under our floater spinnaker. Stormy tried going out to sea and then coming back in again, but as we neared the finishing line, we were still leading, carrying our floater spinnaker. And here it's Stormy sailing through Waianawa's lee, as Gill Littler up forward on Waianawa has a little trouble getting the headsail up. Look at Stormy Petrel, her extra weight really carrying her way through the smooth water. Notice how nicely she moves as she goes along. Finally, after a little trouble, we drop our spinnaker, and here it comes down now. At one stage, both ourselves and Stormy were completely becalmed, and all of a sudden we realised we were going backwards in the tide. There was a mad scramble to get our anchors out, but a light breeze came in again, and we started to move forwards. We then worked out to weather of Stormy again, and moved closer to the finish. The spectator boats started to accumulate, and unbeknown to us, the other boats further back in the fleet were coming up fast. Young Nick and some of the other boats had gone into the Rangitoto shore, and while ourselves and Stormy were fighting it out half a mile from the finishing line, young Nick, Escapade, Optimist were on the Rangitoto shore. The spectator fleet got larger and larger as we neared the finishing line. As a last desperate move, we tried our spanker to get to the finishing line and to get into some breeze. But this didn't work, and the boats on the Rangitoto shore came streaming in, leaving us in a hole, and the race was on between Stormy and young Nick to see who got to the finishing line first. Stormy picked up a light breeze and just squeezed across the finishing line. Look at her ghosting through there. She was closely followed by young Nick, reaching in from the Rangitoto shoreline, really going under drifter and mainsail. After young Nick, Joran came in. Also, after working along the Rangitoto shore, Optimist and Escapade started coming in. We were still in a hole and having trouble getting out of it. But finally, we picked up the new southwesterly breeze and started heading for the line. However, Escapade finished next, with Optimist close behind her. And Waianawa, after leading for 148 of the 150 miles, crossed the line in 7th place. Sid Fisher, Stormy Petrel.
When we finally caught Waianawa, we were slightly behind them and had the experience of trying a shy spinnaker tacking duel while they were running square, and we elected then, because of the tidal conditions, to stay in close to the shore. We didn't have a lot of luck in overhauling them. However, when the wind died, it became a lottery of where the wind came from first. Fortunately, we were in the windward position. Joran, young Nick, and a few of the other boats saw the conditions, the adverse tidal conditions we were in, and benefiting from that experience, went inside the spectator fleet right up the shore and carried a fresh breeze right through.
Alan Warwick. Alan, you must feel pretty happy.
Well, I don't really know, actually. It was a bit of a shambles right from the start. We weren't in too good a position early on. We were coming, I think, 5th or 6th up the side of Rangitoto, and we could see that there was no air and a lot of tide, so we worked the shore. We tried to close the shore with a spinnaker on early on, and then with a drifter, and we could see the others have problems amongst the spectator fleet, so we just tacked up the shore with a drifter, and took a lot of courage to put the last final tack into Rangitoto Lighthouse before we came out, because we could see the others starting to get air near the line, but we could also see the westerly come in, and we were playing on the westerly, and that's what we went for, and somehow the boys found the mark through those thousands of boats, and we weaved our way through terrible churned up water and through so many boats it wasn't even funny, but somehow they got to the mark, but unfortunately we got there just a few seconds too late.
And how did I feel? After the wind dropped, we were alongside Stormy. We drifted through her lee and got slightly ahead of her. And from then on, it was just a mass of boats. We couldn't get any clear air at all. At one stage, we were well ahead of Stormy. And then she picked up a little bit of a puff and went slightly ahead of us. And I guess what happened then was all the boats went with her. All the spectator boats moved up with her and just left us in one hell of a big hole, which we just couldn't get out of. And we bounced around for quite some time. And we finally got moving again. We had to sail through about 300 or 400 boats just to get to the finishing line. And for us anyway, it wasn't a really good finish. Stormy didn't come out unscathed. She had hit a reef in Tiri Passage and badly damaged her lead keel. But worse was to come. We were protested on by young Nick for an alleged port and starboard breach and were subsequently disqualified. And here is the only film taken of the incident. Waiano attacks to go round the first mark, leading the fleet. She squares away, and you can see young Nick and Escapade coming in. Waiano squares away to go down between the two boats. Sets her spinnaker and goes through the gap. Alan Warwick alleged he had to alter course to avoid a collision. The third race, another 30-miler, was sailed in easterly winds of 10 to 15 knots. The boats are now sailing round, getting ready for the start. Now the boats are moving in for the gun. They're off, heading for the first mark. Good breeze, good sailing conditions, and the boats are moving well. Here we have young Nick and Escapade sailing in close company, two Sparkman and Stevens boats designed by Olin Stevens, and really moving nicely. Escapade using her new 170% Genoa, which we only finished making 3 days before the contest. Young Nick has tacked onto the other board, and here is Waianoa looking right down the sails. Maria, Escapade again, with young Nick down to leeward. Eight out of the 17 boats competing, including the Swan 37s, were designed by the world-famous American yachtsman Olin Stevens, who has designed many famous yachts, including the last two successful America's Cup defenders. Olin, your Swan 37 designs are doing well. Are they designed for light weather?
No, it's a standardized boat, and we have to try to make it a good all-around boat, and I wouldn't say the conditions have been so light.
Italy's Kokira hasn't been going so well. Do you think she is too big for these conditions?
Well, she's a new boat. It takes a little getting used to, and I'm happy to see her going a little better today.
Do you intend to make any drastic design changes after watching these races?
Oh, that's sort of classified information, I should say.
As a yachting centre, how do you rate the Hauraki Gulf?
Oh, it's so wonderful. I've never seen a more beautiful place to sail or greater enthusiasm. I guess the two go together, but it's a great combination.
Olin, how about a prediction for this race?
Well, I think Hal Spalkin and his German crew and Optimist B have a pretty good lead. I'd like to see them pulled back, but it doesn't look too easy.
Olin's prediction was right, and Optimist B finished over 3 minutes ahead of her nearest rival, Kokira. Preparations are now well in hand, provisioning the boats for the 270-mile offshore race. Food and stores has to be put on board and stored away for the race, which starts at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At this stage, the points were Stormy Petrel, 55 1/8, Young Nick, 50, Optimist B, 48 1/4, and Escapade, 47. The 300-mile race, the big race in the one-ton cup. Counting for double points, this race, for any of the top 12 boats, if they win it, could entitle them to winning the one-ton cup. The race starts in the inner Gulf with a beat out to Channel Island, out to Cuvier Island, a 66-mile leg up around the Poor Knights, into Nungaroo Bay, back to the Poor Knights, back to Groper Rock off the Mogahinau Islands, down to Canoe Rock off Kowau Island, back out to Channel Island, and back into the finish off Rangitoto Island.
Okay, come on, let's get it going. Hey, crank it. Come on. Get it moving. Right, drive over the line.
45 seconds.
Thanks, Lou.
Tough time. 40 seconds. 35.
The boats are all now milling round, getting ready for the start.
15.
How long? Quick. 10 seconds. Up! 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 Starboard! Starboard! There's no water for them, pull in.
Cazza ancora, cazza ancora.
Vai!
Dai, forza!
Yeah, drag it on.
On into the night. This race started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the boats beat out toward Channel Island in a lightning easterly breeze. The fleet split, with some of the boats going to the Little Barrier side and the bulk of the fleet going in towards Coromandel. As night falls, some of the crews try and grab a little bit of sleep, because they realise they may not get some for quite some time. As dawn breaks, the positions of the boats become a little clearer. We find Stormy Petrel is once again in the lead, closely followed by Young Nick, and they are quite a long way clear of the rest of the fleet. And they are on the long 66-mile leg from Cuvier Island up to the Poor Knights. At this stage, Runaway, designed and built in New Zealand and chartered by Germany, was lying third.
Right, in a bit now. We can come up a bit. The wind's eased a bit.
T'arrives sous le vent, Kiné, quelque chose? Bon. Sous le vent, il n'y a rien. Hein. Tirer la contre-écoute.
Non, tu prépares tes bras, là, ici, ton écoute. Fabrice.
Non, la meilleure sans tirer.
Achtung, laatste wende.
Klar ist?
Ist auch wirklich alles klar?
Ja.
Klar. Okay. Geh rum. Bist du schnell?
Zieh doch mal ein bisschen, na los.
After rounding the Poor Knights, the fleet slogged into Nungaroo Bay and into the second long night. At dawn on the last morning, the marathon was nearly over. Stormy Petrel had built up a tremendous lead over the next boat. She was over 50 minutes ahead of Waianawa, Runaway and Victoria, who were in a bunch behind her. But already at this stage, it became obvious that Stormy was going to win. As she moves gracefully across the finishing line, the fifth race now becomes a mere formality, as the Cup is won by Australia. As in previous years, the last race cannot alter any of the placings. To Sid Fisher and his crew and their boat Stormy Petrel, they have really sailed her well and deserve their win.
Stormy Petrel has won the fourth one-ton Cup race. On professional points, Stormy Petrel appears to have won the coveted trophy. The Spiceman and Stevens design boat crossed the finish line off A-Boy in the Ragatato Channel about 50 minutes ago. Stormy Petrel's win gives her 3 victories in 4 races. There is a real battle going on for the minor placing. Waianawa, given by the one-ton Cup holder Crispy Zaid, is leading from 4 other boats as they approach the finish line of the 280-mile race.
Young Nick, and we were surprised that you left and cleared out from the fleet as much as you did. What do you think? Any particular thing, or do you reckon you got the brakes?
Oh, I think our boat probably went better in the chop. We had a selection of good helmsmen on board, and I think the pressure was kept on all the time. I think the sails were particularly well cut for the conditions that we were sailing in at the time. All round, I think it was a pretty good combination, and probably the boat being a little heavier ballasted than the other similar Swan 37s cut through the chop a bit better. We certainly sailed a lot higher.
Are you going to keep Stormy Petrel and have another go next Christmas, or are you going to give it away?
No, I don't think so. I think if we defend the thing, I'll build another boat.
Congratulations, Sid Fisher and crew. Congratulations, Australia.
The one-ton Cup, Stormy Petrel, Australia, S. Fisher.
We thought the Navy were terrific. We thought the spectators were terrific. They kept out of the rain.